Hey, Pastor Matt here, back for another episode of AskTVC. So I have about 5 questions that I'll cover with you this week. The first one is, and I'm guessing this was birthed out of me talking about in a couple of episodes ago, what was coming in the future in regards to series. The question is, how did you land on the Apostles' Creed for the fall sermon series, and what do you hope? Really, there was a progression of events that led to the Apostles' Creed. The first was Ligonier rolled out a study, and in that study, it showed that basic Orthodox Christian belief was way down among evangelicals, that a large chunk of evangelicals couldn't quite articulate or understood or maybe even believed in the Trinity, and really not kind of the secondary issues that might seem to divide us at times, but kind of orthodox. This has been the historic Christian definition of these things. And so I'd read that study and began to be concerned about maybe how we were teaching and training at the Village. And then from there, JT English, who joined our staff to take over training, went through our membership process and just said, hey, just a note on the membership process. I feel like we're heavy on distinctives and we lack clarity on basic beliefs. So even how we're teaching membership here is really focusing more on our distinctives as opposed to really basic beliefs of kind of historic Christian faith. And so then there was that conversation. Then lastly, we were memorizing the Apostles' Creed with my son for school. And really in the midst of all of that, I thought it would be a good thing for the men and women of the Village Church. It'd be a good thing for us to consider one of the creeds, whether that be Apostle or Nicene or one of those creeds. And so I landed on the Apostles' Creed for a couple of reasons. One, it's a component of really 3 bigger components. So the early church had, whether you call it the Old Roman Creed or the Apostles' Creed, they had basically they would have the proclamation of the word. And the Apostles' Creed is more as a baptism creed. It's a creed that doesn't encompass all of Jesus's life and ministry and all the aspects of the kingdom. That's what the catechism would be for, and that's the second piece. So you had the preaching of the word, then you had the catechism that would be trained, that the men and women would be trained in, and then the Apostles' Creed was that place that when you got in the baptistry, you would affirm the Apostles' Creed, and then you would be baptized. So I thought that taking kind of these big kind of basic belief sentences and turning them into a 12-week series would help the church grow in a greater understanding and knowledge of the basic beliefs of the Christian faith. And so that's why I landed on the Apostles' Creed, and we're building out all sorts of different things around them as the church enters into this season, because the Apostles' Creed can't stand alone. It shouldn't stand alone. It has to be flanked by other pieces to give us a more full picture of what God has done for us in Jesus Christ. And so that's why the Apostles' Creed. The second question, this is it's a heavy one. It says, what are important things to remember when cancer takes a loved one? How does good theology play in? So I think good theology helps in every situation. Good theology helps in good times, in joy. Good theology helps in bad times, in sorrow. And so really, the more we understand, and this might even roll into another question on the list, the more we understand the nature, scope, and character of God and have an understanding of what to do with suffering and loss and what God's role is in that, the better it will be for us in navigating these things that are coming for all of us. No one's getting out of this world without losing a loved one, without entering into spaces where we don't quite understand. And when it comes to cancer, which is such an insidious disease, in how it takes us, in what it robs from us in regards to dignity before our life here on earth is extinguished. An understanding of where God is at work in that, and then whether or not He is ultimately the cause of that or not. I think those are big, massive questions that need to be wrestled with, and a strong theology of suffering, I think, should be present in a church and definitely should be fought for in our own personal lives. And so I hope that's helpful. I would push to understand it. As far as losing someone to cancer goes, I think the big thing, and this is going to be, I'm not trying to be vague as much as I just want to, one of the things that Augustine said, who was the bishop of Hippo in northern Africa, is he explained life in a Genesis 3 world as having your face pressed up against a stained glass window, that all you'll see is jagged glass and what looks to be brokenness. But if you could pull far enough back, you'd be able to see the stained glass window of what God is creating and doing, either via his allowance or by a sovereign decree, or however the different terms are that are used to kind of explain this mystery. But ultimately that God is good and gracious, and you need first and foremost to look to the cross as an example of that goodness and grace towards all of us. And so I hope that's helpful to you. Another question here. I'm not quite sure I understand the question. I'll just do my best. If I fail, I apologize. What would your approach look like to youth ministry in a community that has no care for the gospel? So I'm not sure if you're asking that you live in a context in which it's hyper-religious, gospel low, or if you're in an area of the country or world in which there's just no palate for the gospel whatsoever. Regardless of your environment, the gospel makes a way. God makes a way through the heralding of the gospel. And so if there's no taste for the gospel in your community, brother or sister, the word of God would bear its weight on you to preach and proclaim and to make disciples and to figure out in the context in which you are, where you can enter the dynamic of that community and help complete faulty reasonings and faulty ways of seeing. And so, again, I think Tim Keller writes really well on this. I think John Frame writes really well on how to kind of do contextualization in a way that a context that doesn't seem to be open to the gospel will have ears to hear it a bit more. You can remove the hurdles for them a bit more. And so that I would just aggressively teach the gospel, looking for contextual ways to communicate more clearly. I feel like I keep getting asked these questions that could get me in trouble, but I'm willing. How does Reformed theology affect one's view of God? Is it really that important? Well, let me start with your second question. I think how we view God is of ultimate importance. What you believe about eternity, what you believe about why we're here, what you believe about how life should be lived are all wrapped up in how you see God. So how you see him and how you understand him are paramount to how you live your life and your interaction with this God of the universe. Reformed theology, that's an interesting, because I want to be careful to make sure we're talking about the same things. Reformed theology is a lot bigger than, say, Reformed soteriology. So Reformed soteriology would just say God saves. So Reformed theology can be covenantal. It has these other pieces. So when people talk about being Reformed, there's 3 or 4 different things they could be talking about. So in regards to just clarity, I would fully embrace what's called Reformed soteriology. And that bottom line is that God saves. And that's as simple as I can make Reformed soteriology. God saves, that there's no one on earth that God could not open up their hearts and minds to believe. This fact alone, this biblical fact alone, I believe, has emboldened my evangelism and fearlessness in proclaiming the gospel more than any other truth out there, because I believe that it's not up to my wise and persuasive arguments to save, but rather for me to herald and proclaim and let God draw, let God soften the heart, let God woo. And so when I have been given a burden by God for a person, I've always just sensed that that's God kind of inviting me to work with him. He's going to save, he's going to rescue, he's going to redeem, and he's including me in to that glorious endeavor. And so I think Reformed soteriology is extremely important. I think how you view God is extremely important. And that Reformed piece for me is what I'd like to just call big God theology. It minimizes me. It minimizes my weaknesses. I don't have to be a Superman. I don't have to have all the right answers. I just have to share the gospel and let God work. And so now, as always, I want to say this. There are a lot of people who love Jesus and see God as a very big God and themselves as a very small person who wouldn't adhere to what I just said and all the implications of Reformed soteriology. But that's how I would answer it. How can we have faith for the things God hasn't specifically promised? And the example here would be marriage. Well, here's how I would caution you. I would caution you to not put faith in things that God has not promised. And so in the example of marriage, God has not promised you marriage. He says that marriage is a good thing. Marriage is even a thing that should be pursued, and that he who finds, to the man, he says, he who finds a wife finds what is good. And so I think ultimately it's a good thing to want and desire and pursue and even pray for. But ultimately what God has said is that he will be enough, and he will give you what you actually ultimately need. And that's where I think our faith should be placed. My faith shouldn't be placed in long life or healthy children or vibrant ministry or whatever. My faith is put in one truth alone, that I am his, that I am loved by him, and he will send what is best for me and for his glory into my life. He will either allow in, or he will personally send all that is necessary for me to be all that he would have me be. He is conforming me into the image of his son. Now, as a 40-year-old pastor of a church who's married with 3 kids, I know he's conforming me into the image of his son via the relationship I have with my wife, via the relationship I have with the village church, via the relationship I have with all 3 of my children. So I know that is the way right now that God is conforming me into the image of his son. But maybe for you, or the one who asked this question, that the Lord is not going to conform you to the image of his son via a spouse, but rather something else, maybe through your singleness and the wrestle with that singleness, or maybe through some other situation in your life. Our faith, our confidence is that he who began the good work in us will be faithful to carry it on into completion. And so we camp there, we trust there, we believe that. Well, thank you for joining us again for Ask TVC. We finished James last week. We'll do a sermon this weekend on the ordinances, celebrating our union with Christ in baptism and communion. And then from there, I'll be out for about 8 weeks on a sabbatical that the Village Church graciously gives me once every 5-6 years. And so it's been 6 years since the last one. And so I'll be out for 8 weeks, and then we'll be back in the fall to start our series on the Apostles' Creed. Until then, God bless you.